So in the last video, where we left off was we had a movie database and we had a bunch of movies and we had a bunch of categories and we wanted to categorize them. And we wanted to categorize our movies, um, and there was a couple of options that we went over. One was to use another join table, a many-to-many relationship table, and probably do a join. And we figured that since joins were expensive, at least if when your movie database keeps growing, your movie categories keeps growing, then and let's say you had a finite list of categories, then joining each row with these two tables is more of an overhead. And what we also saw was that we could now use a binary representation of the category. So for instance, since in the case of Casino Royale movie, since it was an action and a thriller, we ended up with a value of 10, and here I've computed the the binary representation for Casino Royale. And so that's how we end up with 10. A Few Good Men ended up with 24 because it was a drama and a thriller. And My Cousin Vinny, since it was a comedy, it ended up with a 1. So in this video, and we had a set of questions that we wanted to talk about. One is, given a movie and a couple of categories that it belongs to, like in this case action and thriller, how would you compute 10? The other was, okay, to figure out, is Casino Royale a comedy movie? And the third question was, give me all the movies in this database that match, I don't know, action, let's say. Give me any movie that matches action. So these were the three questions, and we're going to talk about the answers to these questions in this video, okay? And so we're back in our drawing board, and we're trying to answer our first question, and the first question is, how do you compute the category for say Casino Royale? Now we know that this is represented as an action movie and as a thriller movie. And action is represented by the first bit, thriller is represented by the third bit. Okay, that we saw. So now let's look at the properties of these bits, and let's do the binary representation of both these and see if we can figure out any way of figuring out how do you get 10 from this mix here. So in this case, action, we had the first bit set, and for thriller we had the third bit set. And now let's say we were to do an OR operation on this. Okay, so now when I do an OR, what I end up with is a 10. So while programmatically trying to figure out how to get 10, we first need to find this number, we need to find this number, and then OR them all together. Okay, and then there could be a bunch of other categories also that I might have, that a movie might be part of. So the way to derive this number from this number here is by doing a left shift on 1. So when I did this, what I end up with is 1, 0, which means I take 1 and I left shift it, so now I end up with 1, 0. So that's how I get this. Now if I wanted this, I would then left shift 1 by 3, and then I would end up with 1, 0, 0, 0. Okay, and then when I OR these two, I would get a 1, 0, 1, 0. So if I wanted to now do that in code, the way I would do it is I would say, okay, my categories are 1 and 3. Okay, and then I start off with the actual computed category, and I say start off with 0. and then I loop through all my categories for C in categories, and what I do is I say computed, let's refactor that, computed is equal to computed or 1 left shift with C, which is exactly what we did previously. So we left shift 1 by 1, and then we left shift 1 by 3, and then we keep ORing them together, and then we print the result. So we say print computed category So when I run this, you'll see I found the computed category was 10. So similarly, if I wanted to do it for drama and thriller, that's 3 and 4, I believe, we would get 24. Okay. So that's how I would compute, I would use bitwise operators of this form. So when you see this next time, you know exactly what it means. Now let's go back to our drawing board. And let's try and answer our second question on figuring out if a bit is set or not. Okay, so now what we had is 1010, and we want to figure out if the comedy bit is set or not. So how would I check if a particular bit, let's say I wanted to figure out if this bit was set, can I use some operations? So let's say you're given 1010, and I wanted to figure out if a particular bit was set. So what could I do if I wanted to figure out, let's say, if the action bit was set or not? So the action, remember, 0, 1, the first bit was action. This is the 0th bit. This was the 0th for second and third bit. So if I wanted to figure out if this bit was set, then somehow if I wanted to do an AND operation and just ensure that this is 1, and if these were all zeros, so if I ended up with a number, if I used this number and used the AND operator, and I ended up with something greater than 0, then I know that that bit was set. So let's try that with this case. So I have 1010, and if I wanted to figure out, let's say, if the comedy bit was set or not, then I look at that and I do an AND operation. So essentially I'm turning off all the other bits, and then when I do an AND here, I get back a 0. So it is equal to 0 and it's not greater than 0. So if I end up with any case where I'm looking for a particular bit, if in this case I'm looking for this bit, in this case I was looking for this bit, and if I end up with a number that is greater than 0, then I know that that bit was set, and if I end up with something that is equal to 0, then I know that that bit was not set. Okay, so let's do that in code, and let's try and figure out if a particular bit was set or not. So in this case, let's look at our example where let's say our value is, or we're looking at Casino Royale, in which case we had the value was 1, and we are looking for category which is, let's say, comedy, which in this case was 0. Okay, so what I would need to do is essentially I would need to do a AND operation with 1 left join category. So if this is set, so I say print this is set if this is greater than 0. Otherwise, not set. So in this case, we are looking for was the comedy bit set when the movie was Casino Royale, and what I end up with is not set. Now what I'm going to try and do is change this to action, and we know that the action bit was set, and when I run this I get back a set. So that's how I would answer my second question. My second question was check if a bit is set. And my first question was compute the category. Now in the third question, I'm gonna check if does a movie match a set, or does a movie contain these categories, any of these categories. Okay. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out if so let's say my taste, I'm looking at the moment, I want to watch only say action movies or comedy movies, and I don't care about dramas and thrillers. And so I want to list out all the movies that are either action or comedy. Okay, so basically let's compute what this comes out to. In this case, comedy was 1 and action was 1 0. So we have 1 1, which is 3. Okay, so now let's look at and in our example we had, let's say, Casino Royale, which was action, which had the action bit set, and it was also a thriller. We had A Few Good Men, which was drama and thriller. This was the third bit, this was the first bit, this was the fourth bit, and we had My Cousin Vinny, which was a comedy, and this was the first bit, or the zeroth bit. Okay, so if I wanted to figure out if my preference today of watching only action or comedy movies really needs to get me either Casino Royale or My Cousin Vinny. So how would I do that? And what is the operation to use for that? So let's figure that out. Okay, so My Cousin Vinny, we know it's a comedy movie, so it comes up to 1. So the category would have been 1. A Few Good Men was, as we saw, it was 24 because the fourth bit and the third bit were set. So we had the fourth bit set and the third bit set, and in this case it was an action and a thriller, or an action and thriller. So I think this bit was set and this bit was set, and we had a 10 here. So 1 0 1 0 1 0 0 0, and this was 24. Okay, so let's look at this case, and this is our preference. So our preference is 3, and so let's compare this with this. So what if we were to do a join, somehow use this and use 1 0 1 0? Okay, so what we end up here when we do, let's try and do an AND for now. Okay, and what we end up here is a 1 here, and we end up with all the zeros. So this is greater than 1. Okay, so if our preference was just comedy movies, then this would have been 0 and we would have ended up with 0. Okay, but since our action, we also had action in mind, when we ANDed them together, we got something that was greater than 0. Okay, so now let's look at My Cousin Vinny, which was a comedy movie, and let's do the same operation on My Cousin Vinny. And that was and when I do an AND, I get back something that is greater than 0. And now let's do the same thing with the other movie, which was A Few Good Men, which was a drama and a thriller, and our choice was action and comedy, and what we end up with when we AND is everything is a 0. So basically now we need to figure out all the movies that match our preference. Okay, so let's write some code for that. So our preference in this case is 3. Okay, and our movie had a category of say 10. So in this case 10 was Casino Royale. And so when I do a movie ampersand preference, so the way I can get this is, so let's say if I was looking for action, and so we can use the same operation up here that we showed here to compute the category, and once we have our preference here, we can use this preference and do a join, okay, and do an AND operator on them, and we can say, hey, if matches your preference, if movie and preference, otherwise does not match. Okay, so now let's try and do this. So this was so 3 was essentially action and comedy, which was my preference. So when I run this, what happened here? So this movie, Casino Royale, because it's an action movie as well, it does match my preference. And let's look at 24, which was A Few Good Men, does not match my preference because it is not neither action nor comedy. So hopefully that explains bitwise operators to you in general, and hope that I added some value and you're no longer scared by looking at this type of code, and now you know exactly what it means.